What if one small act of kindness spoken in just the right language could change everything? In a quiet cafe tucked away in Boston, a single dad with a quiet past offers help to strangers, not knowing that someone is watching. And what she sees will set in motion something far greater than either of them imagined. But this isn't a story about going viral. It's about what happens when compassion speaks louder than words. Before we begin, if you enjoy heartfelt stories that inspire, heal, and remind us of the beauty in everyday moments, consider subscribing to the channel. Your support means the world, and it helps more kind souls find these stories too. Now, let's begin. Single dad spoke 6 languages to help tourists. The woman, watching, owned the entire cafe chain. The morning rush at Kind Cup Café in Boston's North End was in full swing, the clatter of ceramic cups and the hiss of the espresso machine forming a kind of urban symphony. Ethan Walker moved behind the counter with the quiet rhythm of someone who had long surrendered to routine. His black apron was dusted with flour from the morning's pastries, and his dark eyes were focused but calm, like a man who had seen too much to ever be flustered by spilled milk or complicated orders. Then it happened. A flurry of confusion erupted near the pastry case. A group of German tourists was clearly struggling to understand the menu on the wall, their brows furrowed, their voices rising in clipped, anxious tones. The young barista at the register, Maggie, was trying to help her voice, flustered, her gestures wide and awkward. Ethan wiped his hands on a towel, stepped forward without a word, and began to speak. "Entschuldigung, darf ich helfen?" he said gently, his German fluid and warm. 4 heads turned at once. One of the tourists, a woman in her 60s, visibly relaxed. "Oh, danke. Ja, wir verstehen das nicht ganz." He explained the difference between a cappuccino and a flat white, clarified the vegetarian options, then smiled and stepped back behind the counter like nothing had happened. Maggie blinked. "You speak German." "Among others," Ethan said quietly, adjusting a tray of croissants. 10 minutes later, a new commotion flared up. A French couple near the back of the cafe was having a mild argument over what appeared to be a missing wallet. The man was red-faced, the woman near tears. Ethan didn't hesitate. "Excusez-moi," he said, stepping up again, this time in smooth Parisian French. "Vous avez peut-être laissé votre portefeuille à la caisse." The woman gasped. "Oui, oh mon Dieu." He led her to the register, and the wallet was there untouched. Ethan smiled softly. "Parfois, les choses les plus importantes reviennent quand on les cherche calmement." Sometimes the most important things come back when we search calmly. As the couple left hand in hand, murmuring their thanks, a silence settled over the cafe. Customers were glancing up from laptops, the staff paused mid-task. Maggie was frozen mouth slightly open. "That was French?" she asked. Ethan only gave a small shrug. "Mostly." Then came the final scene in what felt like an impromptu one-man play. An elderly Italian man stumbled in, pale and confused, clutching his chest. His daughter, barely in her 20s, was frantically trying to help him sit. Ethan dropped everything and rushed to their side, speaking gently in Italian, calming both of them as Maggie dialed 911. By the time the ambulance arrived, Ethan had the man sipping water, breathing steadily. "Grazie mille," the young woman said, teary-eyed. You helped my father." Ethan nodded and smiled. "Tutto ben." As the paramedics wheeled the man away, the cafe was completely still. Even the espresso machine had gone quiet. It was Maggie who finally whispered, "Who are you?" Ethan didn't answer. He went back to the counter, picked up the towel, and continued cleaning the espresso spouts like nothing had happened. But someone else had been watching. From the corner near the window, a woman in a navy trench coat stirred her coffee unnoticed. Her face was calm, but her eyes shimmered with a mix of recognition and something like wonder. She'd arrived alone. No assistant, no laptop, just a quiet presence. But now, as she slowly stood and placed her ceramic cup back on the table, her demeanor sharpened. She slid something beneath the cup before slipping out through the front door. No one noticed her leave. Not Ethan. Not Maggie. Not the other customers. She was gone before anyone even realized she'd been there. It wasn't until later, when Ethan was bussing tables, that he found a small gold-edged business card beneath the empty cup. There was no name on the front. Only a single phrase embossed in fine cursive, "We should talk." On the back, a private phone number. Ethan frowned and slipped the card into his apron pocket, his brows knitting together. The name of the woman, the reason for the message, a mystery. He didn't know he'd just caught the attention of the most important woman he'd ever meet. And he certainly didn't know that by the end of the month his quiet life of espresso shots and silent evenings would be over. Forever. Ethan sat alone on the worn wooden bench outside Kincup Café, the golden business card resting in his hand like it held a weight far greater than paper should. The edges were crisp, the font elegant and deliberate. He turned it over again. We should talk. That kind of message could mean anything or everything. He had seen enough in his years as a Foreign Service officer to know that vague messages rarely came without consequence. And yet, he wasn't in Ukraine or Geneva or South Sudan anymore. He was just a single dad pulling espresso shots in Boston and trying to keep his daughter from disappearing into silence completely. Maybe someone had simply been impressed. Maybe they thought he could tutor a multilingual kid. Maybe "Hey Maggie's" voice broke through his thoughts. She handed him a to-go cup with a lazy smile. Your usual. On the house. For, saving the day in 6 languages. Ethan took the cup with a nod. Thanks. She squinted. You sure you're not like ex-CIA or something? You keep dropping these surprise talents like breadcrumbs. Ethan allowed himself the hint of a smile. Not CIA. Well, whatever you are, it's nice to have you here, she said, then paused, suddenly serious. You make people feel safe. Not everyone knows how to do that. Ethan looked away, uncomfortable with praise. It's just coffee. No, she said, it's the way you offer it. She left him with that thought, and he watched her disappear back through the cafe door, apron swinging. Later that day, when the mid-afternoon lull settled over the cafe like a warm quilt, Ethan was cleaning the milk steamer when the bell above the door jingled. He didn't need to turn around to know it was her. She had a particular stillness to her steps, a confidence without arrogance. When he did look, she was already seated in the same corner booth, a small smile playing on her lips, a thick wool coat folded beside her. Ethan walked over slowly. You again. I suppose you found my card. Her voice was warm, articulate. Her eyes a clear gray that missed nothing. I did. I hoped you'd call. I don't usually respond to anonymous notes left under cups. I figured you might be that kind of man. She paused, then extended her hand. Clara Benson. He froze. Benson. The name wasn't just familiar, it was legendary. Kincup Café wasn't just a neighborhood spot, it was a national brand. Over 600 locations, widely considered the ethical Starbucks. And George Benson, its founder, had passed away 3 years ago in a quiet blaze of tributes and glowing obituaries. His daughter, Clara Benson, had disappeared from the spotlight after that, until now. I'm guessing you know the name, she said softly. Ethan sat down across from her slowly. I do. She folded her hands, businesslike but gentle. I come to different locations. Quietly. I sit. I listen. I watch. And sometimes I meet people who remind me why my father started this place in the first place. And I reminded you of him, Ethan asked, unsure whether to be flattered or worried. No, she said. You reminded me of why I stayed. Why I didn't sell everything the moment the lawyers said I could. I watched you today. You didn't just translate words. You translated need, fear, frustration, and you answered with calm. That's not something you can train. He met her gaze, and something shifted in his chest, a mix of admiration, wariness, and curiosity. I'm not looking for a promotion, he said, his voice even. I'm not interested in being the face of something. I know, she said. That's exactly why I came. She reached into her coat and pulled out a folded piece of paper. "This is an idea my father had just before he passed. He called it Kind Cup Legacy, a model cafe not for profit but for community, a place where people from every background could feel seen, heard, served in their own language. I haven't found the right person to build it with." Ethan didn't take the paper. He stared at her, his thoughts spinning. "I'm not a symbol," he said finally. "I'm a father trying to keep my daughter from slipping through the cracks. I work part-time so I can pick her up after school. She has a therapist and I have bills. That's the shape of my life right now." Clara nodded. "I'm not asking you to change your life. I'm asking you to let the world see who you already are." There was a long pause. "Come for coffee," she added lightly. "Just coffee. We talk. No cameras, no contracts. If you don't want to hear more, I'll never bring it up again." Ethan exhaled. "Why me?" She looked down for a moment, then back up. "Because the man who speaks 6 languages fluently and uses all of them to make strangers feel human, that's not someone I meet every day." The bell above the door rang again. Ethan's eyes flicked toward the entrance. Lila, 9 years old, dark-haired like her father, eyes wide with curiosity but cautious as ever. She waited at the entrance backpack slung over one shoulder. Ethan stood. "I have to go." Clara rose too. "Of course." He hesitated. "Same time tomorrow." Her smile deepened. "I'll be here." He crossed the cafe till Lila ruffled her hair and took her small hand in his. As they walked past Clara, Lila glanced at the woman, then up at her father. "Who was that?" Ethan looked down at her, then back at Clara, who was watching them with a quiet, gentle expression. "Someone who speaks my language," he said. And for the first time in weeks he realized he might be ready to speak hers too. The school parking lot buzzed with the soft hum of engines and scattered conversations. Parents leaned against their cars, waving at children tumbling out of classrooms with backpacks swinging, laughter spilling over the sidewalk like wind chimes. Ethan stood beneath the golden-leaved maple tree just outside the school gates, hands tucked into his jacket pockets, eyes scanning the clusters of children. He spotted her before she saw him. Leela, his daughter, small and serious, walking with the precise steps of a child who didn't want to be noticed. Her long brown hair fell in a straight curtain to her shoulders, her gaze downcast fingers twisting the strap of her backpack. Ethan's heart tightened. At 9, Lila had become a quiet presence in every room she entered. A kind, observant girl who said little not because she had nothing to say, but because the world had once shouted too loud for her to answer back. When she finally lifted her gaze and saw him, her face lit up, not with a smile, but with the subtle softening only a father could read. She jogged toward him, slowing just before impact, and he caught her in a gentle, one-armed hug. "Hi, Peanut," he said. "Hi, Dad." They walked together in silence for a while, passing rows of red-brick townhouses, a quiet rhythm between them. Ethan had long ago stopped trying to force conversation. Lila spoke in gestures, glances, the occasional sentence that carried more weight than whole paragraphs from other kids. "How was school?" he asked, just for the sake of the ritual. She shrugged. "It was okay. Anything interesting happen?" Someone threw up during music. He chuckled softly. "Please tell me it wasn't you." "Nope." A beat, but I moved away quickly. He glanced down at her. Good instincts. When they got home, Lila dropped her bag with a practiced thud and disappeared into her corner of the small 2-bedroom apartment. Ethan started dinner grilled cheese and tomato soup, a classic she'd always loved. As the smell filled the kitchen, he heard her humming. It was faint, almost imperceptible, but it was there. He followed the sound and paused at the doorway. Lila sat on the floor by the coffee table, her notebook open, crayons spread out in a fan of colors. But what caught his attention wasn't the drawing, it was the language. She had written the word bonjour in bright blue marker across the top of the page. "Practicing your French?" he asked gently. She didn't look up. Sort of. He stepped closer, crouching down beside her. "Where'd that come from?" I heard the lady at the cafe say it. The one who sat with you." Ethan blinked. Clara Lila nodded. She sounded like Mom used to when she read French bedtime stories. He swallowed hard. It had been nearly 4 years since Emmeline's accident, but her voice still lived in corners of their home in old books and Lila's memories in Ethan's quietest moments. "She studied in Paris," he said. "That's where I met her." Leila looked up. "Do you miss her voice every day?" She hesitated. "Sometimes I try to remember it, but it's like when you wake up and forget your dream right away." He reached out gently, brushed a strand of hair from her cheek. "That's why we keep the stories. So we remember the sound even when the words fade." After dinner, while Lila curled up on the couch with her sketch pad, Ethan pulled out an old language workbook from the bookshelf. It was battered, its pages soft at the corners from Emmeline's fingers. He opened it to a simple dialogue in French and sat beside Lila. "Want to learn something new?" She looked over. "Okay." And so he began, slow, deliberate pronunciation, light-hearted translations. Lila giggled when he exaggerated accents, scrunched her nose when he made her repeat tricky words like "s'il vous plaît." For the first time in weeks, the apartment felt less like a place they were surviving in and more like home again. Later that night, when Lila was asleep, Ethan sat at the kitchen table, the workbook still open in front of him. He traced Emmeline's faded handwriting in the margins. "Don't teach words, teach meaning." He smiled to himself, bittersweet. The next morning at the cafe, Maggie bounced over with 2 lattes and a grin. "You'll never guess who came by asking for you." Ethan raised an eyebrow. "Santa Claus, the lady with the coat. Clara. She said she had something to drop off." Maggie handed him a small square box wrapped in brown paper. No label, just his name in neat cursive on top. He opened it slowly. Inside was a single beautiful hardcover book, The Language of Empathy Building, Bridges Through Words. A note was tucked inside. "Ethan, thought you might appreciate this and perhaps share it with your favorite French student. Clara." He stared at the note, then at the book, then at the empty booth where Clara had once sat. She hadn't asked for a meeting, hadn't left a business card. Just a gesture, a small kindness. That night, when he tucked Lila in, she held the new book in her arms like a treasure. "She remembered me," Lila whispered. Ethan nodded. Yes, she did. And deep down, he realized so had he. Not just remembered Clara. He had remembered how it felt to be seen, to be spoken to in the language of the heart. Clara Benson stood alone on the rooftop terrace of her late father's townhouse, a steaming mug of herbal tea cradled in her hands. The Boston skyline stretched before her in a soft, orange haze of sunset, the Charles River shimmering in the distance. It had been 3 years since George Benson, the man the world knew as a coffee mogul, and she had known simply as Dad, passed away in this very house. And yet, every time she came here, Clara half expected to see him emerge from the glass doors with a flannel robe, chuckling about some minor disaster in one of the cafes. He used to say, "Running a business isn't about selling coffee, it's about remembering people's names and getting their order right on the 3rd try." Clara had watched him build Kind Cup from a tiny corner cafe into a nationwide symbol of warmth and community. And when the cancer took him, he left everything Cher's legacy decision-making power in her hands. She'd been a high-powered attorney in New York at the time, thriving in litigation, adored by partners and feared by opposing counsel. But her father's death changed everything. Grief has a way of stripping ambition down to its bones. So she walked away. She turned down a partner track, sold her penthouse, and quietly returned to Boston. Not to lead Kind Cup in headlines or attend board meetings, she left that to a carefully selected CEO. Clara chose a different path. She would travel anonymously through her father's empire. Visit each cafe. Sit in the corners. Watch the people. Listen. And find out if her father's vision had survived success. Until she met Ethan, she hadn't been sure. She could still picture him from that first morning moving through chaos with calm precision, meeting people where they were not just linguistically but emotionally. He didn't perform. He belonged in the moment. There was no branding strategy in that man. No ego, no false humility. Just humanity. She sipped her tea, then reached for the old leather journal she kept in the top drawer of the terrace table. Her father's. The one he wrote ideas in after his diagnosis, scribbling between chemo sessions and hospice visits. She flipped to the bookmarked page and read aloud, softly, Kind Cup Legacy, a model cafe for community integration. Multilingual service. Pay it forward culture. Run by someone who knows what it means to listen first. She traced her finger under that last line. That's what she had seen in Ethan. He didn't interrupt. He didn't assume. He translated not just words, but emotion. The way her father did when he'd talk to customers who had just lost their job or had their first baby or didn't know anyone in the country. Clara closed the journal gently and stood. She'd already told Ethan about her father's idea, but she had intentionally left out how personal it was. She hadn't told him she'd already turned down 3 corporate candidates with pristine resumes. She hadn't told him she was tired of sanitized charity projects meant for PR headlines. She was looking for something real. She wanted to build something with someone who had bled a little too. 2 days later, Clara walked back into the North End Kind Cup just as the morning rush was winding down. Ethan was at the counter wiping down the espresso machine, sleeves rolled to his elbows, focus narrowed to a stubborn stain of dried milk foam. She waited until he noticed her. He looked up with a slight nod. "Clara." "Hi." She smiled. "I hope I didn't interrupt your daily battle with steamed milk." He smirked. "It's a war I never truly win." Maggie waved cheerfully from across the cafe. "Your friend's back." "Ethan?" "She's not Ethan." Started, then gave up. "Would you like to sit?" They took the same booth in the corner, light pooling through the wide window, warming the wood grain between them. Clara set down a file folder thinner than the usual corporate pitch. "I want to show you something. Just pages, no strings." He glanced at it but didn't open it yet. "I read your book," Lila's voice said softly behind him. Both adults turned. Lila stood by the table, backpack still on, cheeks pink from the cold. Clara smiled. "Did you like it?" Lila nodded. "I liked the part where people learn how to say sorry in different languages." Ethan looked at his daughter, surprised. That wasn't something she usually noticed or said out loud. "You know," Clara said gently, "sometimes adults forget that words are more than just sounds. They carry what we mean, even if we don't say it perfectly." Lila thought for a second. "I like French best. It sounds like it's not in a hurry." Ethan swallowed. It was the most he'd heard her say to anyone in months. "She's learning fast," he said, his voice soft with pride. Clara turned back to him. "So are you." He finally opened the folder. Inside were a few simple pages sketches of a cafe layout, community boards in multiple languages, a flow of service that included quiet tables for neurodiverse customers, and optional conversation corners for people who came in alone. At the bottom of the last page, Cafe of Peace, a Kind Cup legacy project. "I'm not asking you to manage a business," Clara said. "I'm asking you to help me co-create a space where kindness is fluent, where people don't have to earn dignity." Ethan stared down at the papers. "It's beautiful," he admitted. "So are you," she said without hesitation. "The way you treat people, Ethan, it's rare." He looked up, startled. "I mean that in the truest, most human sense. You remind people that they matter." "I don't want to lose that." He said nothing for a long moment. Then Lila spoke again. "Would there be books in lots of languages?" Clara smiled. "Only if you help me choose them." Lila nodded. "Okay." Ethan looked at the two of them, his daughter no longer silent and the woman who had gently opened something in both of them. He hadn't said yes, but for the first time he wasn't afraid of saying it. The cold snap had come early that October, sending a crispness into the air that made breath visible and scarves necessary. Kind Cup's North End location was buzzing with its usual morning rhythm, fresh pastries stacked beneath glass domes, steam curling from ceramic mugs, the hiss and gurgle of the espresso machine working overtime. Ethan moved through it all with practiced grace, but something inside him had shifted. The folder Clara had left with him sat on his nightstand at home. He hadn't made a decision, but each time he passed by it, the words "Café of Peace" seemed to lean off the page a little more, as if asking him to look deeper. "Dad Lila," said, tugging at the hem of his sweater. She stood beside him at the cafe's front counter, clutching her backpack, her eyes brighter than usual. "Hey, you're early. I thought you had art class." "Got out a bit sooner today," she said. "Is it okay if I sit in the corner booth?" He nodded. "Sure, I'll bring you something warm." Lila walked off her steps, small but steady, and Ethan noticed something different. She didn't sit with her head down this time. Instead, she opened a small notebook, pulled out a mechanical pencil, and began to sketch. He couldn't see what it was, but she was focused. He brought her a hot chocolate with extra whipped cream. She looked up and smiled, really smiled, and Ethan's heart caught. "Merci," she said softly. He blinked. "Did you just—" Lila giggled and pointed at the book Clara had given her. It lay beside her, open and marked up with sticky tabs in 3 colors. "I'm learning." "Well, it's working," he said, dropping a kiss on the top of her head before heading back behind the counter. 10 minutes later, the cafe door opened with its familiar chime, and Clara stepped inside. She wasn't alone. Beside her was an elderly woman, wrapped in a pale gray wool coat. Her white curls neatly pinned her expression, alert but warm. She carried a cane but walked without needing it much. There was a grace to her movements that reminded Ethan of diplomats he'd once known, those who commanded rooms without raising their voices. Clara caught Ethan's eye and gestured subtly. He came around the counter and approached. "This is Mrs. Appelbaum," Clara said. "She was my father's mentor when he first opened Kind Cup. I asked her to visit today." Ethan offered his hand. "Pleasure to meet you." Likewise, the woman said, her voice smooth and deep. "I've heard you're the man who speaks to people in more than one way." Ethan smiled politely. "I try." She turned to Clara. "You were right to bring me." They sat in the far booth. Lila remained in her spot, occasionally glancing over, curious. Ethan moved behind the counter, preparing Clara's usual chai with oat milk and another herbal tea for her guest. As he served them, Clara spoke softly. "Mrs. Appelbaum helped design the original Kind Cup model, what my dad called the listening architecture. You probably never noticed, but every location has round tables near the windows, softer acoustics, and booths that face in rather than out. It was all meant to encourage community, not consumerism." Ethan leaned slightly on the edge of the booth. "I did notice, but I didn't know it had a name." Mrs. Appelbaum looked at him kindly. "You understand it intuitively. That's rare." He didn't know what to say to that, so he said nothing. Clara leaned forward. "She's the one who said I needed to find the next voice of this brand. Not a face, not a resume. A voice that speaks through action." Ethan folded his arms. "That's flattering. But what you're describing sounds like a figurehead. I'm a single dad. I'm not trying to become the next poster boy for coffee and compassion." "No," Mrs. Appelbaum said calmly. "You're trying to raise a daughter in a world that forgot how to listen. That makes you perfect." Later that afternoon, after the older woman had gone and Clara was preparing to leave, Lila approached them. She held out her sketchbook to Clara. "I made this for the cafe idea," she said. "There's a bookshelf in every language, and a quiet room with pillows, and one with windows all around so people can sit in the sun even when they feel sad." Clara's throat tightened as she flipped through the pages. Crayon colors, soft pencil outlines, and big labels in blocky handwriting: Peace Room, Book Nook, Language Wall. "Lila, this is beautiful," Clara whispered. You even included Braille." "I saw it in one of Mom's old books," Lila said. "People don't have to hear to feel welcome." Ethan knelt beside her, placing a hand on her small back. "You remembered that I remember a lot." Lila said, her voice matter-of-fact but full of something deeper. "Even when I don't say it." Clara met Ethan's gaze. "That's exactly what this is about." He nodded slowly. "You're right." That evening, Ethan stood in their modest kitchen stirring a pot of vegetable stew, his hands moving out of muscle memory while his mind ran through images. Clara's expression at Lila's drawings, Mrs. Appelbaum's calm certainty the way the sunlight hit the booth where he and Clara always sat. He walked to the table and picked up the folder again. This time he opened it without hesitation. He reread every line, every idea. This wasn't just about a brand. It was about belonging, dignity, offering more than a drink, offering recognition. He looked toward Lila's room. She was reading out loud in French, softly practicing. Her voice was unsure but growing steadier with each sentence. That's what healing sounded like. Not a miracle. Just a slow return of voice. He turned back to the folder and smiled. Maybe it was time he found his again, too. The autumn wind swept through Boston's cobbled streets like a whisper from the harbor, tousling scarves and shaking golden leaves loose from branches. Inside Kind Cup, the atmosphere was cozy and warm. Mismatched mugs clinked softly, jazz played under the murmur of conversations, and Ethan, for once, felt settled. It had been a good morning. Lila had walked into school without needing to clutch his hand the whole way. Clara had sent him an article about inclusive design in multilingual learning spaces with a simple caption, "Thought of you and Lila." And for the first time in a long while, the ache of Emmeline's absence didn't feel quite so heavy. Then Maggie screamed. Not in fear, but in that half-choked, disbelieving gasp that comes when the internet suddenly pulls your name out of anonymity and tosses it into the spotlight. "Ethan. Ethan. You need to see this." He turned toward the register, alarmed. "What happened?" She waved her phone at him, wide-eyed and breathless. Oh my God, you're viral." "What?" She jabbed at the screen, then thrust it toward him. There he was. A grainy video, shaky but unmistakable, him moving through the café, helping the German tourists, calming the French couple, soothing the Italian grandfather. A cascade of languages spoken with ease, empathy, and quiet grace. But it wasn't the footage that hit him like a punch to the ribs. It was the caption, the barista, who speaks 6 languages and changes lives. Over coffee, true kindness exists. Below it, 3.4 million views. And counting. "What? Is this?" he murmured. "I posted it on TikTok 3 days ago," Maggie admitted, cringing. "I just thought it was cool how you helped everyone. I didn't think it'd blow up." Clara walked in just then, coat still dusted with leaves. She caught the tension in the air immediately. "Everything okay?" Ethan's jaw tightened. "Apparently, I'm an overnight sensation." Clara blinked, then looked at the phone. Her face changed in subtle degrees surprise recognition, something like dread. "I didn't know," she said quickly. "Maggie, did you tag him?" No, full name," Maggie said. "Just Ethan from Boston." But someone must have traced it through the café location. They're already in the comments asking for interviews. Ethan handed the phone back, face pale. "This wasn't what I signed up for." By noon, it was chaos. A local reporter showed up outside with a camera crew asking customers about the multilingual hero of the North End. A stranger from out of state had driven 2 hours just to ask for a photo. Ethan had to sneak Lila out the back when school ended early for a staff development day. He was halfway to locking the front door when Clara caught up with him. "Ethan, wait." He turned. "Did you know she filmed that?" "No," she said, breathless. "I had no idea she posted it. But listen, I don't want this, Clara. I don't want attention. I don't want people turning what I do into a sideshow." She flinched. "It's not a sideshow. It's real. That's why people are reacting. Because they see you." "I didn't ask to be seen," he snapped, then lowered his voice, catching himself. I'm trying to protect Lila. Her world is small for a reason. We worked hard for that safety. Clara nodded, quiet for a beat. You're right. The words landed with a soft thud between them. Honest. Undeniable. I would have reacted the same way she said. But Ethan, this isn't about fame. This is about impact. What you did in there, it moved people. Millions of them. And you didn't do it for likes or clicks. That's what makes it powerful. He didn't respond. She tried again. The world's loud and angry and disconnected. And then you come along quietly building bridges in 6 languages without asking for anything. That reminds people that gentleness still exists. Ethan looked away. Clara stepped closer. You think this hurts your daughter, but have you seen her lately? She's talking more, drawing plans, speaking French. She smiles, Ethan. Do you know how rare that was 6 months ago? He clenched his jaw. She's healing, Clara said gently. And so are you. He exhaled slowly. It's just, I feel like I'm losing control. Clara softened. Maybe. Or maybe you're just finally letting go of hiding. That evening, back at home, Ethan sat in the living room with Lila. She was curled up on the couch watching the video on his phone. You look calm, she said, matter-of-factly. He chuckled. That's because I didn't know I was being filmed. She paused the video. You helped those people. I did. She looked at him. Are you mad that other people saw? He hesitated. I was. At first, why he considered. Because sometimes when people look too closely, they stop seeing the real you. Lila nodded thoughtfully. I think, if someone sees the good part, it's okay. Ethan stared at her, amazed at how clearly she'd cut through the noise. He pulled her into a hug, pressing a kiss to her forehead. You're right. Clara saw the good part, Lila whispered. She did. They sat in silence for a while, the warmth of the apartment hugging them back. Outside, the world still buzzed and clicked and judged, but here inside was a different language, one spoken without words, and for the first time, Ethan didn't feel exposed. He felt understood. The leaves outside Kind Cup danced in bursts of gold and red, skittering down the sidewalk like confetti from a celebration no one had planned. But inside the cafe, Ethan felt none of the season's joy. He'd returned to work after 3 days of laying low, 3 days of ignoring media requests, of walking Lila to school with his baseball cap pulled low and his heart even lower. The video had done more than stir up attention. It had cracked open a part of him he thought was long sealed, the part that remembered what it meant to matter. But being seen again came with risks. Someone from the corporate office called this morning. Dean muttered, his eyes not leaving the spreadsheet on the iPad. Wanted to verify that you work here. Ethan raised an eyebrow. Did you tell them I'm real? Dean gave him a gruff look. Told them I wasn't running a simulation, if that's what they meant. Ethan smiled faintly, but it didn't last. Anything else, he asked? Dean hesitated. Said they'd be sending someone down next week. Internal review. Probably a formality, but he looked up. You made waves, Ethan. Some people surf waves. Others try to drown in them. Ethan leaned on the counter, exhaling. I never wanted to be part of a storm. Dean glanced at him, his expression softening. Storms don't ask your permission. That afternoon, Clara sat in the back office of Kind Cup's downtown headquarters, her laptop open but forgotten. On the screen was an internal memo forwarded to her by a well-meaning assistant. Due to recent media attention regarding a non-manager employee, we recommend caution in associating Kind Cup's brand image with unsanctioned public figures. Legacy project discussions may need reevaluation. She read it twice, then leaned back in her chair, eyes burning. It wasn't the message itself that rattled her. It was the language unsanctioned public figure, as if Ethan were a liability, as if his decency needed a corporate disclaimer. Her phone buzzed. A text from her executive assistant board meeting moved up to Friday. They want a status update on the legacy project. Clara stared at the message. She knew exactly what that meant. The board had always humored her side project, indulging it the way one might indulge a grieving daughter trying to carry her father's torch. But now that the media spotlight had found Ethan, now that people were calling for him to be elevated, some of the suits were getting nervous. Kind Cup had been built on human values, but somewhere along the way too many hands had decided human wasn't scalable. Ethan didn't know about the memo, or the board meeting, but he could feel the shift in Clara. She came into the cafe that evening looking like she'd fought a battle and wasn't sure if she'd won. Her smile was still there, but muted, like the color had been turned down. "Can we walk?" she asked. They walked down the harbor walk where the water lapped quietly against the wooden pilings and ferry horns sounded in the distance. The city shimmered behind them, too bright to feel real. "They're questioning you, aren't they?" Ethan said. Clara didn't pretend. "They're questioning everything. The legacy project, the video, even my judgment. And..." She stopped walking. "I don't care what they think of me, but I care if they try to twist who you are." Ethan looked away. Maybe they're right. Maybe I'm not the guy for this. "No," she said, stepping closer. "They don't get to decide that." "You do." He chuckled without humor. "I'm a part-time barista with a kid and a lot of scars. I didn't come here to change the world." "No," Clara said softly. "But you are changing it. You changed mine, and Lila's, and that woman who cried when you ordered in Italian because it reminded her of her father." He was quiet for a long moment. "I don't want to fail," he said. "You won't. I don't want to drag Lila into something that turns ugly. She's already in it, and she's blooming." Ethan's jaw flexed. "Then what do I do? Stand up in front of a boardroom full of people who see kindness as a marketing risk?" Clara touched his hand. "No. You tell the truth, in your voice, the way you told it to me and Maggie and Lila. That's all you've ever had to do." He looked at her. Really. Looked and saw not just strength but fatigue. She wasn't just fighting for the project. She was fighting for herself, for the right to lead the company her father built with the values they shared. He nodded slowly. "Then let me talk to them." Her eyes widened. "You do that, I will. But not as a spokesman, not as a brand, just as me." Clara reached into her coat pocket and pulled out the first page of her father's journal, the one with the hand-drawn sketch of the Café of Peace. She handed it to him. "You're the reason this page matters again." He folded it carefully like something sacred. Then he reached for her hand. She let him, and for the first time since their worlds had collided, they didn't need to translate anything. The silence between them said it all. The glass walls of the Kind Cup headquarters glinted under the morning sun, reflecting the Boston skyline like a mirror pretending to understand the sky. Ethan stood outside them, adjusting the cuffs of his only blazer, a charcoal gray relic from his diplomatic days that still fit, though it hadn't been worn in years. He hadn't worn it since the funeral. Until today. Inside, Clara was waiting. He could see her through the lobby window standing in front of the elevator, calm in her cream blazer, a folder in one hand and her other clenched tight at her side. Her eyes met his through the glass. She didn't wave. She didn't need to. This wasn't the kind of morning for small gestures. "Ready?" she asked when he stepped inside. He nodded, but truthfully he wasn't sure. The walk through the corridors of Kind Cup HQ was a quiet one. Not because they didn't want to talk, but because some silences were too full to interrupt. Clara's heels clicked gently on the marble floor. Ethan's boots were soundless by comparison, worn soft from years of quiet steps. The conference room loomed ahead like a theater stage. The frosted glass doors bore the engraved words, "Kindness begins with us." He wasn't here to audition. He was here to remind. Inside, a long table stretched toward a windowed wall overlooking the city. 12 seats. 11 filled. Men and women in suits of navy gray and black. Phones, silenced pens ready. Some faces polite, others unreadable. one or two already skeptical. Clara stood to introduce him. "This is Ethan Walker," she said. "You've all seen the video. Some of you have concerns. That's fair. But before you form conclusions, I asked Ethan to share his own story, in his own voice." She stepped back. Ethan stood alone. For a moment, all he could hear was the distant hum of HVAC and the tick of a metal pen cap being flipped open. He took a breath. Then he began. "My name is Ethan Walker. I'm a father, a former Foreign Service officer, and until a few days ago, a quiet barista at Kind Cup North End. You may know me now as the man who speaks 6 languages. But that's not the most important thing I do. Not by a long shot." He paused, making eye contact with no one and everyone. "I speak to people the way I'd want someone to speak to my daughter, gently, clearly, without expectation. That's something I learned not from my time abroad, but from losing my wife." A ripple of attention moved through the room. My daughter Lila was 5 when we lost Emmeline. She stopped talking, wouldn't speak at school, barely whispered at home, and I didn't know how to reach her. So I started small. Gestures, pictures, songs, eventually language. And one day a single word came out of her mouth. "Bonjour." He smiled just enough for it to ache. I remembered then what language is really for. It's not performance, it's permission. To feel safe, to feel seen, to belong. He stepped closer to the table. "I've worked at Kind Cup for over a year. Not because I needed the money, though it helped. I stayed because your cafes offer something rare, a space where people sit down and breathe. That shouldn't be rare, but it is." A woman at the far end of the table shifted forward slightly. Listening now. I didn't ask to go viral. I didn't script kindness. It just happened. Because a woman was scared. A man was lost. A tourist was confused. And I did what anyone should do. I spoke to them in a way they could understand. He reached into his pocket and pulled out a folded page, George Benson's sketch of the Café of Peace. He held it up. This isn't a marketing pitch. It's a return to what made Kind Cup matter in the first place, a space for empathy, language, connection. He looked straight at the CEO, a man named Derek, whose expression had remained frozen for most of the presentation. "I'm not asking for a job title, or to be your brand's next face. I'm asking for a chance to build this space, not for profit, not for performance, but for people, like my daughter, like her classmates, like the woman who cried when I asked how her father was in Italian." The room was still, utterly, completely still. Then someone near the middle of the table, an older woman with silver hair and kind eyes, spoke. "What would you call it?" Ethan smiled, unfolding the paper completely. "Café of Peace." Silence again. Then the room shifted. Not loud, not flashy, but in small, powerful ways. A quiet hum of nods. A clearing of throats. Pens tapping slower. One man leaned forward to ask for a closer look at the sketch. Clara exhaled for the first time in what felt like hours. Outside, as they stepped back into the afternoon sun, Clara turned to him. "I've been waiting to show them that page for 3 years," she said softly. He looked at her. "What stopped you? I hadn't found the person it belonged to yet." Ethan said nothing, but as they walked down the steps together, Lila was waiting at the corner holding a paper in her hand. She ran up to them and handed it to Ethan. It was a child's drawing of a cafe. Colorful awning, flags from different countries, people with different skin tones and smiles holding cups of coffee. Above it, in bold block letters, "Welcome in any language." Clara bent to read it, blinking back something fierce in her eyes. "Is this your logo pitch?" Ethan asked, teasing gently. Lila shrugged. "You can use it if you want." Ethan looked at Clara, then back at his daughter. "I do," he said. And this time he meant it in every way. The grand opening wasn't grand in the traditional sense. There were no red ribbons, no flashing cameras, no celebrity endorsements. But as the soft morning light poured through the floor-to-ceiling windows of the newly opened Café of Peace, Ethan stood at the counter and thought, "This is more beautiful than anything I ever dreamed of." The space had been designed with intentional warmth. No two tables were the same shape, yet each felt perfectly placed. The walls displayed hand-painted welcome signs in more than 40 languages, many written by local students, including Lila. Floor rugs from different cultures softened the hardwood, and near the back, nestled beside a low bookshelf, was the Peace Nook, a reading area where visitors could curl up with multilingual books or just sit in silence. But what truly made the space come alive was its people. Clara moved through the cafe with sleeves rolled and sleeves metaphorically off, helping stock mugs, pausing to greet every guest like an old friend. No one knew she was the co-owner. No one cared. She laughed when someone mistook her for the assistant manager, and when a local journalist asked for a comment, she pointed to Ethan and said, "He's the one you want to hear from." Ethan wasn't sure he wanted to be heard. But when a man from Syria came in confused and anxious, clutching a paper written in Arabic, Ethan stepped forward and translated with gentle ease, helping him find the address he'd been trying to locate for 2 hours. When a teenager shyly asked if they could order in Spanish just to practice, Ethan smiled and replied, "Por supuesto." When a deaf woman approached the counter, Maggie, now trained in basic ASL, signed, "Welcome." "What would you like?" The vision wasn't theory anymore. It was real, and it was working. By mid-morning, the cafe was humming. Ethan took a break outside, leaning against the doorframe as Lila and Clara joined him with warm apple cider in compostable cups. "You did it," Clara said, bumping her shoulder lightly against his. He shook his head. "We did it." Lila sat between them, eyes scanning the crowd inside. That lady by the window, she came alone. But now she's talking to the other man. They were strangers when she sat down. Clara followed her gaze. It's funny, isn't it? All people need is a reason not to stay alone. Ethan sipped his cider, watching the two strangers lean in, laughing quietly over their shared table. He turned to Lila. "You want to give them one of your cards?" She nodded quickly, pulling a small box from her backpack. Inside were little index cards she had designed by hand, each with a greeting in a different language plus one phrase at the bottom. "You are welcome here." She tiptoed back inside and gently placed the card on their table, then returned. "She didn't even look surprised," Lila said, like she already knew. "Maybe she did," Claire replied. "Maybe people recognize welcome when it's real." Ethan looked between them. This woman who had fought for his dignity before he could speak for it himself, and this little girl who was no longer afraid of her own voice. "I thought I was building something for others," he said quietly. "But maybe this place was always building me." That afternoon, Clara gathered the staff, mostly local hires, a few refugees and volunteers from a nearby language school, and announced a weekly open mic night called Voices Without Borders. No politics, no religion, just stories, songs, language. "Bring a poem in your first language," she told them. "Or teach us a word your grandmother used to say." Ethan smiled as the staff lit up with ideas, and Maggie whispered to a new barista, "This place isn't a job. It's a chance." Later, as the cafe wound down for the evening and the last of the customers left behind cups with lipstick prints and sugar-stirred memories, Ethan closed the register and turned off the music. Only Clara and Lila remained Clara, organizing tomorrow's pastry list, and Lila sketching her next big idea, a mural of the globe, each continent filled with local greetings in hand lettering. Ethan walked to the window looking out at the city. The same city he'd once tried to disappear into. Now he was woven into it, into the people who came for coffee and stayed for community, into the stories that began with hello and ended with "I see you." Clara joined him at the window. "We still have a long way to go," she said. "We always will," he replied. She looked at him, eyes soft. "But you're not walking it alone anymore." He turned to face her. "Neither are you." Their hands brushed, then clasped. And in that quiet moment, nothing more needed to be said. Because sometimes the greatest peace isn't the absence of noise, it's the presence of understanding. And here, in this little cafe built on kindness and the languages of the heart, understanding had finally found a home. It had been 3 weeks since the Cafe of Peace opened its doors, and though Ethan still arrived every morning before sunrise, the work no longer felt like something he had to brace for. It felt rooted, like he belonged. The cafe had quickly become more than a coffee shop. It was part sanctuary, part community classroom, and part bridge between lives that might never have crossed otherwise. People didn't just come in for drinks, they came in with stories. A former diplomat from Ghana who now taught Twi to volunteers. A teenage girl who brought her grandfather every Thursday to read poetry in Farsi. A retired librarian who had started organizing weekly read-alouds in your mother tongue. And through it all, Ethan moved like the quiet center of a turning world. But something was changing in him. Something deeper than pride or gratitude. It was the feeling that he could love again. And the way Clara looked at him lately, eyes steady presence unforced, told him he wasn't imagining it. One crisp Saturday morning, Ethan arrived early to prepare the cafe for a donor event Clara had organized a soft open for city council members, educators, and community leaders. Clara was already there arranging tables with small vases of flowers and multilingual place cards. "You're early," she said, looking up with a smile. "You're earlier." She shrugged. "Couldn't sleep. Kept thinking about how far this place has come." Ethan stepped closer. "It's not just the cafe that's grown." She looked at him, eyes searching. "Do you ever wonder," she asked, "what your life would have looked like if you hadn't left the Foreign Service?" "All the time," he admitted. "But lately, I wonder more about what I would have missed." Clara's expression softened. "Like what?" He didn't hesitate. Lila becoming herself again. This cafe. You. She looked down, cheeks warming. "You always speak like you're translating a feeling." "I am," he said quietly. "That's the only language I trust now, the one you don't need to learn to understand." She didn't reply, but reached over and touched his hand. It stayed there, still and certain. Before either could say more, the door opened and Lila walked in her backpack, bouncing slightly and her eyes bright. "Dad," she said, holding up a thick stack of pages. "I finished it." Clara leaned in. "Finished what, my project?" Lila said proudly. "The multilingual kindness map." Ethan raised an eyebrow. "What's that?" Lila spread the pages across a table like a magician revealing her grand finale. Each page was a different neighborhood of Boston. Color-coded dots marked every language spoken by someone Layla had met in the cafe. She'd interviewed customers, friends, staff. On the back of each page, she wrote the same word in each language. "Welcome." Clara's eyes brimmed. "This is extraordinary," she whispered. Lila beamed. "I want to put it on the cafe wall, so everyone knows they're part of something." Ethan looked at his daughter, so open, so brave, and felt his chest ache in the best way. "Where did you get this idea?" he asked. Lila shrugged. "I don't know, I just started listening." Clara knelt beside her. That's where kindness always starts. The donor event buzzed with warmth rather than pressure. Ethan moved between tables, offering coffee and quiet thanks while Clara spoke to the gathered guests with her signature calm passion. Lila's project was displayed on an easel by the front window, and people gathered around it like they would a work of art. A teacher from Dorchester wiped her eyes. "This girl, she understands something we've forgotten." Ethan heard it all, took it in, and tucked it away in the quiet drawer of his heart where moments of grace lived. As the evening wound down and the last few guests lingered with final cups of tea, Ethan pulled Clara aside. "I need to tell you something." She turned to him, cautious but open. "I used to think I'd never have room in my life for love again," he said. "That I'd used it up, that all I had left was what I could give to Lila." He took a breath. "But being around you, it reminded me that love doesn't run out. It evolves. It changes shape. and if we're lucky it finds us when we're not chasing it anymore." Clara blinked and a single tear escaped down her cheek. "I don't want to chase," she said. "You don't have to," he replied. "I'm right here." She stepped forward and he caught her, their hands threading together like two languages meeting in the middle. The cafe lights dimmed behind them, casting long shadows across the walls over Lila's project and across the worn wooden floor where so many voices had begun to rise again. They stood in silence for a long time. Not because they didn't have words, but because the moment spoke perfectly for itself. And the only language that mattered was the one they'd always shared, the language of the heart. 6 months later, the Cafe of Peace was no longer just a neighborhood secret, it was a city-wide symbol. The cafe had been featured in local and national news, not for its trendy aesthetics or clever marketing, but for something simpler, rarer, the atmosphere it created. People didn't just come to drink coffee, they came to feel seen. On a mild spring morning, sunlight streamed through the windows, washing the wooden floors in warmth. The cafe was full but not noisy. Conversations ebbed and flowed in Spanish, Mandarin, American Sign Language, Farsi, Swahili, and the universal hum of gentle laughter. There was a toddler babbling in Tagalog at the corner table while her grandmother shared a story in English. A construction worker just off his night shift sat beside a poet translating Neruda into Polish. No one seemed out of place. No one ever did here. In the middle of it all stood Ethan, still in his apron, still making lattes, but now with a subtle peace in his shoulders as though something within him had finally unlocked. He greeted everyone by name, and in their language if he could. Behind the counter a wall had been hand-painted by Lila and a group of local students. It read, "Kindness is the language the deaf can hear and the blind can see." Mark Twain. Beneath it, guests had begun pinning notes, photographs, and translations of the quote in dozens of languages. It had become an unofficial shrine not to fame or success, but to connection. Clara stepped out from the back room carrying a tray of the pastries, her sleeves rolled to her elbows, hair tied in a soft bun. She wasn't the boss here. She was part of the hum, the current that kept the cafe moving. Ethan turned as she passed. "You're on cinnamon duty today." She raised an eyebrow. "You think I can't be trusted with almond croissants? I've seen what happens when you get distracted talking about immigrant poetry." She smiled. "Fine, I'll stay in the cinnamon lane." He leaned closer. "I love you in every language I know." Her eyes crinkled at the edges. "Then don't burn the coffee again." They both laughed, and Ethan swore that sound, that shared unscripted sound, was his favorite music. Later that afternoon, the cafe closed early for a private event. Chairs were rearranged, a projector was set up. Guests arrived, community leaders, former refugees, local families, students, Kind Cup board members. But there were no formal speeches, no podiums. Just a circle of chairs and an invitation, share something that shaped you. One by one, people spoke. A man from Haiti told of how Ethan helped him fill out a job application in French the day after he arrived in the U.S. A woman shared how her daughter, who had selective mutism, now read aloud every Saturday at the cafe's story hour because she saw Lila doing the same. A teenage barista wiped tears as she explained that she used to hate her accent, until Maggie reminded her it meant she spoke more than one world. Leila spoke too. She stood in the middle of the circle clutching a stack of her handmade kindness cards and told the room in perfect English and careful French, "I used to think I was broken because I didn't talk much. But this place helped me remember that listening is a kind of speaking too." Ethan sat beside Clara, his hand in hers, and knew there would never be another moment like this, and also that they would create 1,000 more just like it. When it was his turn, he stood, cleared his throat, and held up one of Lila's cards. "I used to believe my life had already narrowed," he said, "that the best I could do was survive, quietly raise my daughter with whatever love I had left, and never ask the world for more than silence." He looked at Clara, then back at the room. "But then I realized love doesn't shrink when we lose someone, it expands if we let it." Through grief, through healing, through every small act of kindness we offer a stranger. He paused. This cafe isn't about me, or Clara, or even Lila, though she might try to argue that. Laughter rippled through the circle. It's about what happens when we choose to speak in the language of compassion. When we let others in, even if we're still learning how to open the door. He held up the card again. You are welcome here. It's not just a phrase. It's a way of living. The room was still. Then someone began to clap. Another followed, and soon the entire circle stood in applause, not loud but sincere, the kind that fills a room like sunlight. That night, after the chairs had been put away and the lights dimmed to their evening glow, Ethan stood behind the counter rinsing mugs while Clara swept the last of the pastry crumbs from the floor. Lila sat by the window drawing her next dream, a cafe on wheels, one that could visit schools and libraries and nursing homes. She'd written the name on top, Kindness Caravan. You think she'll actually build it one day? Clara asked, looking at the sketch. Ethan nodded. I think she already has. In here. He tapped his chest. Clara came to him, wrapped her arms around his waist. You built something too, she said. Something your daughter and this world will never forget. He pulled her in closer. No, he whispered. We did. Outside, the night deepened. A few stars blinked to life over the city, and inside a small cafe on a quiet corner of Boston, warmth lingered long after the last cup had been emptied. Because kindness, when spoken fluently, leaves an echo that never fades. We'd love to hear from you. Where in the world are you watching from? And what part of this story spoke to you the most? If this story touched your heart, don't forget to like, share, and subscribe for more uplifting tales just like this one. We post regularly stories of hope-healing second chances and the quiet power of kindness. Thank you so much for spending your time with us today. Until next time, take care and keep believing in the good.